In this episode, I'm joined by Francesco Fratto, the director of the Spanish Language Immersion Program in Herricks Public Schools in New York. He shares the origins of the program, what it looks like in practice, and the successes and challenges along the way. Take this chance to really understand what immersion means. We can learn a lot from Francesco's experience and the program to bring back to our own schools. So let's jump in. Are you a language teacher looking for some reassurance that what you're doing in the classroom is on the right track? Or maybe you're looking for some ways to teach even more effectively. If you're one or the other or somewhere in between, you've landed in the right place. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast with your host, me, Joshua Cabral. You're about to get tips, tools, and resources so that your students continue to rise in proficiency and communicate with confidence. Let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral, and thank you so much, as always, for being here, taking the time out of your week to listen to what teachers are doing in their classrooms so that you can be introspective about what's going on in your own classroom. That's what makes you an awesome educator. So thank you for taking the time to do that. Make sure that you are following or subscribing on whatever app that you're on, and maybe even leave a little comment rating so other teachers can see it as well. So our topic today is all about immersion and dual immersion programs. And not just sort of they're out there and how is that happening, but how do you start one? How do you even go about starting this? So if you want to bring this to your district, let's have a conversation with someone who's done it. So I have invited on today Francesco Fratto, who is in New York. He's on Long Island, and he is in the Herricks Public School District, and he is the director of world languages in his district, and he oversees the world language program, but also the dual language immersion program, which we're going to learn a lot about as we're going through. So Francesco is not new to the teaching of languages world. He's been in it for about 27 years. And for 14 of those, he was a Spanish teacher. And the latter part of his career, the latter 50% of his career, he has been in the administrative position. And along with that, you might see him on the conference circuit. He is the president of NYSALA, which he will tell us a little bit more about as we go through. But also he is a past president of NYSAFEL, the New York State Association of Foreign Language Teachers. He's gone to the Chinese language teacher conferences, and he most recently presented at the annual Dual Language Immersion Conference in Salt Lake City on a lot of the topics we'll be talking about today. So there's a lot of information about Francesco. I hope I did you justice in getting it all out there, but thank you so much for being with us today, Francesco Fratto.
And thank you for having me. One thing, too, because I'm very protective, I also oversee the English as a New Language program, or for those of you, the rest of the United States ESL program. And so I'm excited about that. And just for NYSALA is an organization, it's a statewide organization that supports world language administrators or lead teachers in order to provide networking, support, advocacy, and just a place to share best practices. I'm excited to share with you about the triumphs and challenges of a dual language immersion program.
Thank you so much for that, and for the clarification about the English as a New Language, which is a New York State term for ESL, English as a New Language. So let's jump in to learning all about immersion programs. And can you tell us what that means for your district? And in general, what is an immersion program? And also, if you could clarify that term dual language immersion as well.
Districts that implement an immersion or dual language or a bilingual, and these are the terms you often hear, it means different things. And what they look like in each district is very different. There are similarities, obviously, but really what it is, when you think about dual language programs, especially if they're brought to the elementary school, is really about teaching not only the language, but also the content. So, you think about immersion. Immersion simply means taking a child or a person and immersing him or her into the language and culture. A dual language immersion program, and especially, if it addresses the needs of English language learners, is often called a two-way immersion program in which the English language learner is in the course or a good number of them. And they are instructed in order to raise the level and ensure literacy in their first language in order to help them transition to the second language, which is L2, which is English in this case. So that's the two-way model. And those are usually called bilingual programs, and depending on the definition of what they want to call themselves. But that's a more common
Mm-hmm.
program. And in New York, and probably I would say in a number of states, that's often set by regulation that you must have one of these programs if you have a certain number of English language learners that speak a particular language at a certain grade level. Our program is what is called a one-way dual language immersion program, Spanish. The majority of our speakers in Herricks do not speak Spanish, though we do have Spanish speakers in the program. Our district is quite diverse. We have about 44 languages that are spoken in our homes. Most of our kids speak Chinese, Korean, Arabic, Hindi. So they're in the immersion program learning Spanish. So that is our goal, bringing them to a very high level of Spanish. And then, of course, you have the very particulars of what that looks like, both at the middle school, the high school, and then at the elementary level. So to have a very clear definition is often a struggle within our profession. And I know that, we're on the National Research Alliance, and we're trying to help define those terms and what those programs look like, what they are, and what they are not. And sometimes you hear also when they talk about bilingual programs, you hear a 90-10, you hear a 50-50. That means what percentage of that time is that child immersed in that language? So are they immersed 90% of the day and 10% in English when you think about two-way programs? And then that percentage starts to shrink as the child starts to get stronger and the acquisition of the English language starts to increase. We keep what is called a 50-50 model, K to 5. So 50% of their day, it's all in Spanish, and then the other 50% is in English.
So what is the content area split between that 50%?
So we've decided when we started the program in 2010, and I wasn't here for that. I was brought in later on, and I transitioned the program to the middle school and then the high school. But the decision was made that math and science would be taught exclusively in Spanish. There is no translation. The model that we have, that one way, is a model that the kids are fully immersed, and you're not doing one day English, one day Spanish in that content, all in Spanish. So math, science, some social studies, because there is a teaming approach to these programs. So we have a Spanish-speaking elementary teacher, and we have the English one on the English side. And they work very closely together. So the English side will teach ELA, or the literacy, right? And then if kids have, at the elementary level, they have the specials, etc. But they will also decide who's going to teach social studies. So sometimes the Spanish teacher might teach social studies, sometimes the English. But it really, at the elementary, it's math and science exclusively, K to 5.
So now I'm curious. I'm sure there are teachers thinking this question right now. When it comes to state testing, so what happens with state testing when the content area is not in English?
And I'm currently having parent informational meetings for incoming kindergarten families. And they ask that question, well, my child's being taught in Spanish, math and science. When it comes to the state assessments in grades 3 through 8, or the Regents exams in New York State, or we administer what are called the NEWAs, which help us understand where the children are with respect to reading and, of course, with math, reading comprehension and math. Are they permitted to take those exams in Spanish? The answer is no in our program, because our children are not designated English language learners. Only English language learners are permitted to take a New York State assessment if that assessment is provided in that child's language. So they have to take it in English. And data tells us, and we all know this, that when you are learning a foreign language or a world language, it actually strengthens you in other areas. So our kids do incredibly well, even though the assessment is administered in English.
You've given us some information specifically about your program, but I would really like to have a clear understanding of sort of how long it's been in existence and what does the articulation look like from sort of entry to graduation out of the program.
So the program started with a previous superintendent who was from Seattle. And of course, you have a number of dual language immersion programs in Seattle. So when he came to the district, he, of course, surveyed the community, realized that it's one of the most diverse communities on Long Island with respect to number of multilingual learners. The diversity is what gives us our strength. And so he implemented the program. He started with a K program, a kindergarten class, and a first grade class, and he started that. And then, of course, we added classes as they went up to the next level. But it was a survey, and the community, we would with you would think with a community with a large number of Chinese speaking residents that they would select Chinese, but they opted for Spanish. They said, we'll teach Chinese at home. We'll send them to a weekend school, but we want them to be multilingual learners. And so they selected Spanish, and they brought in experts. So Miriam Met, or Mimi Met, was brought in to help guide the program. And so, and there were others as well that helped guide the program. So it's 50-50, as I said, 50%. So you have math and science at the elementary. And there's that teaming approach, which I think is important. You have two teachers, and they each start off with a class. And then midway, they flip. So the teacher that started off with English will then get the other group in the afternoon, and the same with the Spanish teacher, and they will just repeat what they taught. And of course, scaffolds and provide scaffolds and differentiation based on the students in the class. Then at the middle school, we then, as we transition them to the middle school, the students drop math and science. That reverts, that goes into English, just because you have different interest, you have strength. The strengths of the students start to surface, and you actually see that at the elementary. But we want to make sure we keep them together with two periods, and that's typical of a 50-50 model, a K to 12. So you have 50%, you have two periods at the middle school. So the kids are taught social studies in grades 6, 7, and 8, the same New York State social studies classes that occur in every class across the state are taught in Spanish to our students. But what we've done, though, is we could not obviously give them an introductory Spanish class. These kids are at an incredibly high level, and we test them with Apple. What we did was we looked at the AP themes, and we decided what themes would be age and level appropriate for our middle school students that they would be able to handle, because you're also dealing with a middle school child, you're dealing with maturity, you're dealing with all the struggles that go into that. We hired Amanda Seawald, another expert, literacy expert, and she helped us think about our curriculum and articulation with that Spanish program in order to ensure that seamless transition into AP in grade 10 at the high school. And so we then, at the high school, once they exit the middle school, they enter the high school. It becomes one class, and it's a very specialized class for them. They're in a 4 honors. In our program, it's 4 honors in grade 9, in which we make sure that the transition to AP classes is seamless, even more so, especially at that level in grade 9. In grade 10, they take AP Spanish, but for the first time, they're co-seated with your traditional AP language student who's taking that assessment in that course in grade 12. So here you have this convergence of the two groups. Once they take the AP, then we develop 2 post-AP courses, high-level courses. One is called Breaking Barriers, Exploring the Spanish-Speaking World. And then in grade 12, we've offered Writers, Thinkers, and Artists of the Spanish-Speaking World.
So I'm hearing with the word immersion, it's typically, I think, what parents, teachers are thinking. Immersion means in the language all day, all the time, everything. And you're reframing that for us to really understand that immersion means that you are learning content in the language and not necessarily start to finish your day that way. And I think that's a very important clarification that I wanted to highlight that you're making.
Yes, linked to the content.
And I think a lot of times we hear in what would on the surface appear to be a traditional language program, and teachers would say, oh, but we do immersion in my class. And it's like, well, if you're learning about Spanish, that's not immersion. It's great. You might be using the language 100% of the time, but that's not what immersion is. Like, are you learning art and science or whatever else that content area? So that's a really important point of clarification. So thank you for making that.
Sure.
So now we've heard the articulation of your program. So if I were just to ask you, this is not a simple question, but what is the goal of your program? So I'm going to my school board and I want them to fund this. So give me those talking points.
Well, number one is I think that, we talk about literacy, right? So we talk about making sure that children reach high levels of literacy. The data shows that when a child is exposed to a second language, it strengthens them across the board. And so one of our goals is to ensure literacy, not just in the English side, but also on the Spanish side, to be able to think. But we've also seen a direct correlation to test scores. When students are taught content in I hate to use that word, foreign language or an immersive type of experience, they actually do better because they're able to handle challenging questions, challenging passages. They think differently. That's one of the pieces as well. The other thing too, which I think most families and advocates want to talk about is, states often talk about college and career ready, but we know that our national standards talk about world ready, right? So it's nice to be college and career ready, but how do you use that in our global society in a world that is so incredibly incredibly connected? We could say that our world is either getting smaller or it's getting bigger. It's really understanding people, it's understanding cultures, it's under speaking other languages. And I think it also gives our students a deeper appreciation of their own culture and maybe where their families come from, or better understanding, the community in which they live. One thing we also want to make sure for our students is that they develop in the 21st century skills of communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. Those are important.
Just to go a little further with the articulation and the goals, is how are you measuring the effectiveness of your program?
It's important, first, that we need to make sure, because this is critical, because you pointed out, and I've talked about this, it's about content, right? They're learning content in the language. Are they acquiring the content, and are they able to not just know facts and figures, etc., but are they able to think and to explain and to apply, etc., those higher order thinking skills that we can quickly see on assessments and on state and NEWA assessments. But I brought in the Apple assessment.
Can you tell us what the Apple exam is?
Sure, it's an assessment that was created by ACTFL, and it simply stands for ACTFL Assessment of Performance Towards Proficiency in Languages. And so it's not your Apple phone or your Apple device. It's an assessment that is administered from grade 3 on, and it's a modified oral proficiency interview, but it's online. And it's offered in the different modalities. It's offered in listening, speaking, reading, and writing.
One last question about the articulation and objectives. I'm curious, are there entry requirements for students to get into the program?
We're not a district that believes in putting barriers in front of children. So, for example, we will have children who have learning disabilities in the program. We will have children who are English language learners in the program. So it's interesting to see sometimes where you have a child who is an identified English language learner. Their home language is Chinese or Arabic or sometimes even, Spanish. We have Spanish speakers in the class. But they will be in our Spanish immersion program learning a third language, Chinese, English, and Spanish. And then when I look at the students in the immersion program, they're actually a microcosm of the larger population. So we have a variety of students. We simply provide them with support as they go through the program.
So now I would like to get into the logistics of this, because I'm thinking there are teachers listening or department heads or administrators there to thinking, this sounds like a worthy thing to do in our district. So let's get into some of the logistics of it. Staffing in a dual immersion program, what is that like?
The challenge is certainly finding teachers who are certified in content areas, or at the elementary level, they're certified K through 6 elementary school teachers. So they have that certification, but they also have to be able to speak the language at incredibly high levels. And because they are going to be discussing and engaging students in abstract topics. In our case, because we're not required to have the program, our teachers simply have the certification in elementary, but they speak high levels of Spanish.
And so now going down more with the
Sure.
logistics, you already talked about your promotion of the program and how you're having conversation with parents in those information sessions. As students are continuing, what retention is like?
It is very rare that a vacancy exists. So parents, the only reason they drop is because there's a very serious issue with the child. Could be social, emotional. It could be a learning issue that the team has come together to say, you know what, maybe this is not the best program, or they move. Right, and that's the
Mhm.
only way that a vacancy comes up, which then affords others the opportunity to move into the program.
Which is my next
Sure.
question. Can you enter the program after kindergarten, and what does that look like?
That happens, and we have, had families who join the program after. We announce that there is a vacancy, or parents contact us and say, "Hey, look, I'm very interested." If the child speaks Spanish at home, or if there is that Spanish literacy and that Spanish is spoken in the home, it becomes much easier because then we say to the parent, "Okay, there is a vacancy. We know there's going to be a vacancy in September in grade 4 or grade 5, etc. You need to make sure you engage with the tutor." And sometimes we suggest tutors, etc. And parents are willing to do that. Make sure that their children are not only able to speak the language, but also be able to talk about the content in the language. So it's not just about giving them some social language here. I often look to, are we getting English language learners in the district that are from Spanish speaking homes? And can I put them into the program? I want to make sure that this program is open to all. And what better way to give a kid who's an L, an English language learner, the opportunity to continue with their first language? So we've done that.
So you addressed this a little bit when you were talking about literacy earlier, but to have a good talking point, when you have parents that are concerned about their child's English literacy development, and so their L1 literacy development, their reading, their writing, and there's concern that they're not going to have all day in the language and learning this. So is that going to be impeded? What is your talking points for that?
When you're talking about families where their kids are coming from monolingual homes, there sometimes is that concern. How are they going to do? And that concern, let me just back up. That concern also exists in some of the families as well who are multilingual. I want to make sure my child speaks English at high levels, be able to read and write and or speak. What we ensure that we first of all we provide the data. We embrace what is called the Teachers College program for literacy development, the early levels, and we share with them that we're very faithful to that program. And we also, what it's important to do, and this is if anyone is looking to bring in a dual language program, is to invite parents, maybe from a neighboring district that has a bilingual program. So we actually bring our parents in to these meetings to talk about, hey, look, your child is not going to have any delays in development unless there's an issue. Or, sometimes we always say to the parent that if your child is struggling in math or science, it doesn't matter what the language of delivery is for that content. They're going to struggle in math and science if it's delivered in English or in Spanish. The question then is, how do we as educators provide supports to that child to overcome those struggles and to give them the skills in order to be able to handle those content areas in the language?
So you had mentioned one of the tools is show them the data. So I'm curious, what is that data? Where are you getting it from, and where can teachers find it?
We look at assessments like the NEWAs, which are assessments as I shared earlier, that test reading comprehension, and it moves with the child. So the assessment is geared where if the child can't answer it, then it drops a level in order to see where that child is with performance wise on reading. The same thing with math. We show that, and we show our charts that are very clear that our immersion students are right exactly where our English, our students who are only in English speaking programs are, and sometimes they're above. And so we need to reassure them that no, in fact, this program is not going to hurt your child. Actually, it's going to help your child. And what you start to see sometimes in math, you start to see that the scores are a bit lower because you're talking about the concepts, but they actually start to really sometimes outperform. And again, it also depends on the strength of the child with understanding math concepts. But ELA, right away, they're at where they're their peers are in all English classrooms.
One last logistic question, and this is the money question, which always comes up. And what I'm hearing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is just my understanding from what you're talking about, is we're not talking about additional teachers that need to be funded for a program like this. It's just a different sort of teacher with a different skill set.
Greg Roberts, who is the gentleman who really pushed for and started a number of the dual language immersion programs in the state of Utah with the support of the governor who asked him to do it. He always said that dual language immersion programs are pretty cheap to start. They don't cost you anything. They really don't. Initially, they do. You have to hire a teacher, but if you're having a teacher that retires, you just simply hire a teacher that speaks the language and or is certified, say has a bilingual extension. The only cost initially is the materials at the elementary level. Schools are always buying that. So for example, we use the Go Math series. So that Go Math series is provided to schools in Spanish or English, and there's always a digital component to it. So the parents can actually go online and switch between languages. If they need to understand what their kids are doing, they will click English, and the same page that their child is working on in Spanish will appear in English to them so they can help their child if needed. Same thing with the science program. The science program at the very beginning was not offered in Spanish. So my teachers were really working hard to translate and to find other sources in order to teach the content. So programs come to you in a number of languages. The only thing is the books. But again, when you're building a classroom library, so you don't buy it in English, you buy it in Spanish.
That's helpful for people that are thinking of starting a program like this. So I am curious about where you continue to be inspired from. What conferences do you go to? Who are the individuals that you're reaching out to? Where's your inspiration coming from?
Well, I have to say that number one, it's besides the conferences, besides the individuals that I'll point to in a minute or so, it's really the kids that inspire me. When I'm walking into those classrooms, I always leave there with a smile on my face because I see the kids acquiring the content, negotiating meaning, and it really just incredible to see. And in fact, it actually has strengthened my world language program, the immersion program, the dual language program. But when we think about people, I look to Greg Roberts, who really was someone that I would turn to and ask questions. He then shared with me some people in the Utah schools, Granite schools, for example. There are people who gave me a tour of their schools when I went to visit the immersion programs there to get a sense of what it looks like at the secondary level. I think of Mimi Med. I think of Amanda Seawald with their experience in working as consultants in dual language programs across the country and internationally. And Fabrice Jameau, who works for the French Embassy, he wrote a book on encouraging parents to advocate for dual language immersion programs. And ACTFL has a strand for dual language immersion. They have a SIG, and really just coming together with colleagues locally here in New York and across the country. John Valentine, who's doing great work in Gwinnett County, Georgia. Gregory Fulkerson in Delaware. You have in Portland, Oregon, you have incredible programs. So there are lots of people out there doing good work. We share, we commiserate because it's not easy. And what rewarding program is easy?
Those other districts that you mentioned and those other individuals, are they working with any programs that have immersion programs with languages other than Spanish?
Oh, absolutely. You will find Korean, you will find French, you will find Russian, you will find Chinese. Houston, I remember the National Chinese Language Conference was in Houston one year, and I actually went to see some dual language programs in the Houston schools. There are a number of languages, and I think any smart leader or any community will see what the community wants and surveys them and bring in the language that they're of great interest. And sometimes it's preserving, say, an indigenous language in order to ensure that the kids from the community continue to honor and respect and speak the language of their people.
I know I've gone to Carla in Minneapolis, and there are often teachers from Native American reservations where they are doing Native American languages that I've engaged with there. So they're definitely out there. So thank you for that. So this is the part in our conversation where I like to pull the teacher curtain back or the administrator curtain back a little bit and get to know not so much Francesco anymore, but Franco, right? And this is what I call this or that. So I'm going to give you two choices, and you just tell me
Sure.
which one you would
Absolutely.
choose and maybe say why. Helps us to get to know you a little bit more. Okay, so the first one, spring or fall? What's your choice?
Fall in New York, it's just incredible. The colors are vivid.
Vivid colors. Okay, so the next one, snow or sand?
Sand. I live near water. Love my walks on the beach daily with the dogs.
Now, this next one I'm very interested in because I know that you are a very proud Italian person with your heritage. So, if you are catching up with friends, are you doing that over coffee or a full-on meal?
Usually a full-on meal. Yeah, no. Coffee, yeah, no. Meal. And it has to be good.
Well, I know the last time that we got together, it was over a meal. So the last time I was in New York and we got together, it was definitely over a meal and not coffee. So I had a feeling.
And it was Cuban food. That's right.
So thank you so much for all this information you're giving us. And there are, I'm sure, teachers, administrators out there that might be looking into starting a program like this, and they'll want to connect with you. So what's the best way for teachers, administrators to connect with you to learn more about this?
Well, they could certainly connect with me on LinkedIn, Francesco Fratto on LinkedIn. They can actually visit our district web pages, the herricks.org, and I'm sure you'll show that.
Show notes,
and simply search for Spanish immersion, and there's my contact information there. And I would be happy to help you or connect you with other people maybe that are closer to you that would support you in any way as you're on the journey of dual language immersion.
Before we say goodbye, I like to leave teachers with some actionable advice. So what would be your sort of nugget of advice for a teacher or administrator who's looking into possibly starting an immersion program in their school?
You're going to get pushback at times. And you know what? You have to advocate for what you truly believe in. And so push back. But push back with facts, with data. There's plenty of data to support these programs. You will find community support. You will find friends within your district. And, they're going to immediately bring to you, oh, the cost. Oh, the budget. It's going to break the budget. No, it's not. So where are your priorities as a district? What do you value? What do you want to see as a graduating student of your district? Is it just college and career ready? Or do you want to see them college, career, and world ready? That's the decision that the school district has to make. So push back, advocate.
I love leaving that college, career, and world ready. Like that right there is a wonderful way to end this time together. So thank you for bringing that up right at the end so that we can grasp onto that as we go. So Francesco, thank you so much for your time today and everything that you've shared with us.
Thank you, and have a great day.
What are your takeaways from that conversation with Francesco Fratto? If you have thought about the possibility of adding an immersion program to your school or district, hopefully you have some talking points to start the conversation. Be sure to check out the show notes to connect with Francesco. You'll also see the link to sign up for Talking Points, my weekly email newsletter with tips and resources for language teaching. There are also links to get in touch with me if you'd like to work together, either in person in your school or remotely. Talk to you soon. Bye for now. You've been listening to the World Language Classroom podcast. Be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss a single episode. Let's continue the conversation on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at WL Classroom. You can also see over 250 blog posts about language teaching at, you guessed it, WLClassroom.com.